This is the D6 generation.
Dice are our vice.
Creating not too horrible content since 2008.
Are you crazy? That's like 400 hours of gamer nonsense.
Oh, I think we're well past that. Hey, welcome to another D6 generation episode. I am super excited because today on the show today, having a trouble today, John. You know, it's because I'm so excited. So on the show today, my brother John is joining me, and this is super exciting because we got a lot of great feedback when we did our D&D live play, which started back in 2020, and then continued for a good amount of time. However, due to life commitments and other things, there was really no way for me to continue DMing that campaign. And so we sort of put a pause on that for an indefinite amount of time. However, John started up his own campaign. And as most Dungeons & Dragons players will know, it's much easier to be a player than a dungeon master, certainly from a time commitment point of view. And so we thought, after about, I don't know how many sessions it's been now, John, but quite a few, we thought maybe it'd be kind of fun to share this one because we got a lot of feedback that folks really enjoyed the other campaign. Liked listening to just sort of, it's like listening and hanging out with your friends play D&D. We thought, wouldn't that be fun to bring back? And so to do that, we're going to be joining the campaign sort of in progress because we didn't start recording the early episodes. And so John and I thought it might be good to sort of have what we call, episode 0, session 0, as they say in old playing games, right? Is like, let's get everybody up to speed on the world, the story so far. So if you do start jumping in and listening to these, you'll know what's going on. And I wanted John to start off with, we're going to do this interview style. So I'm going to ask John a bunch of questions and kind of pretend I don't know what's going on. I know what's going on, but we'll see what happens here. Maybe John also leak out some information I'm not supposed to know yet. So that's also part of my clever plan.
Or more likely information you're supposed to know and you forgot.
That's probably it. Every dungeon master.
Because that happens a lot as a player.
Biggest challenge, right? It's like, oh man, I sure hope they remember that little tidbit I gave them 3 sessions ago, because otherwise they're never going to get through this door. Let me start off with this question, John. So I think the biggest difference, both you and I both been playing D&D since we were like, I don't know, 10, 12, some number like that. I think it's 12 for me and 10 for you or something.
You introduced me when I was in 3rd grade. So
there you go. So whatever the age that was. But what's interesting is you and I have obviously different DM styles a little bit, although we both are certainly passionate about some similar things from our campaigns. But I think the biggest difference is I've tried a couple times to make my own worlds, but it just is, I don't know. I'm more of what I call a world tweaker dungeon master. I prefer to take, source material, a module, Greyhawk or the Sword Coast or Faerun or whatever, and then work within that. I think all dungeon masters are either a world builder or a world tweaker. I don't think anybody uses like off the shelf. We all fiddle with it once we get it, but it inspires us. But it's a lot more work to be a world builder, and I've always been really impressed by this. And John, you've always made these amazing worlds. Kind of give me some of the background. Why do you? What part of world building do you really enjoy? Why do you kind of go down that road as opposed to using someone else's?
Well, so because of my personality, I don't like I'm a completist when it comes to video games and stuff like that. And my problem I find which is nice that you guys can do that, these world tweakers, I feel like I have to include everything that's in a pre-made world or module. And I have to understand it like the back of my hand, which is hard. Whereas if you create your own world, it's your world and whatever you say goes. So you're not like trying to memorize a certain person's personality or play them a certain way. For an NPC, you can create and do whatever you want. So it opens everything up to it. I think what most people, when they get in trouble, is they try to do everything at once, create an entire world before they start playing. And I learned, a long time ago that it's better to build a framework and then you build out the details of everything as you go there. And what's cool about that too is your players add to that world, and that's what's the most fun is they leave their mark on it, whether it's actual things their characters did or just like background stuff they wanted. Like for example, with your character Namfoodle, which we'll get in more detail, you wanted to be a Way Watcher. Well, I wouldn't do anything with Way Watchers in my world if my player didn't say, hey, I want to be a Way Watcher. Now there's this whole Way Watcher thing, and that happens with every player. And that's how they add to the world and make it their own. And inevitably, each campaign you play in, it leaves its mark on it. And that's the fun part, is that they kind of change the history and change everything. And so that's why I like world making, because
that's awesome. And I can see that. And what's really cool about this is this particular world you've created. I think this is like the third or fourth campaign or set of players you've run through it.
Yeah, there's been four campaigns in it. One I kind of added on after the fact, and everybody's looking at the map now who's got the video, and you'll see up in the northeast there's this Lost Kingdom, and that's a kind of I don't know if a poetic name, but or maybe too on the mark, but that campaign was run during the pandemic. So and that was run with just my kids. And so I ended up taking that little world, that this little part of a world I created, and attaching it to my overall world. And it's tucked up in there, that it's kind of lost to the rest of the world at this point, for now. But who knows what'll happen in the future. So.
Right. But you've run in these four campaigns, and each part has sort of taken place in maybe a different area of your world, which is a lot.
They did. There was a little overlap in the East between the original party that I created this for, which was you and our kids, and then a later group I played with my high school buddies, Joe, Pete, and Craig, and their kids, and that was that started during the pandemic as well. And so that was a bit of an overlap, because they walked in some of the same places, and actually ended up, some of the characters from, this is the fun part, some of the characters from the second campaign actually met characters from the previous campaign that had kind of stopped adventuring at that point. So it was kind of neat.
That is cool. And so now, and in that sort of in the early campaign that involved me and our kids, Nampoodle's actually, who's now a regular character in the Sands of Khassan, the current campaign we're going to share with everybody. So Nampoodle kind of is lifted stock and barrel and sort of somehow we'll talk about that more, into this world, which is sort of neat. But then also what's cool is the foundation you built in that world is present in the specific area now, Khassan, we're in. How did you come up with the idea, Edux and Khassan, and maybe walk people through? How did you come up with this? Like, what was the inspiration for this world?
So a couple of things inspired this world. The first thing with all the kingdoms, and they're very loosely based on just, regions around our world and cultures around the world. And I say very loosely because I don't do a lot of back study on these things. So some of it's just ideas. Some of it's from like movies. Like you'll see a lot of things in Khassan are, Opa Aladdin style, as they say, from Disney. So it's kind of like, Agrabah style stuff. And so a lot of it's kind of stuff I kind of just get the ideas. And I wanted like all these different cultures available to my players if they wanted to be from, a different part or a different culture, or wanted their character kind of based on a different culture in the real world. And so I thought it would be neat. And I got that those ideas from actually the player's handbook, where they talk about humans in the race of humans in the player's handbook. They break down to humans into all these different not races of humans, I guess, but different versions of humans. And they all, when you read the descriptions and backgrounds on them, they all seem to have their own kind of cultural distinction, again, kind of based on the real world. And so I kind of took that idea from them and split up the world into these various kingdoms. And Edix was, so when I create a world, I always like to have a overall antagonist just floating around. And, I grew up with, Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. So, always had the Empire, and you have, Sauron floating around. So you always kind of have that big bad guy in the background kind of floating around. And I like to have that, but I don't
floating around. He's a beholder. I see what you did.
Right. Yeah. And but my players don't necessarily need to interact with that person. Right. Inevitably, there's going to be some interaction, but whether they deal with that overall problem or not is up to them. And I, generally with your lower level players, obviously they're not going to be taking on your main antagonist in the beginning. So there's a lot of room for them to go into different things or to get involved in that. And the reason that it's a beholder is because at the exact same time I made this world, Xanthar's Guide to Everything came out that was all about beholders. And I'm like, well, I've never really used a beholder for much, so I'm going to make that my main bad guy. So
it was awesome. And you did a good job too in the first campaign I was in. because obviously we started as level, I think it was level 1, but
right. You're the only, just for the viewers out there, or listeners out there, you are the only player in this campaign that started at first level, basically, because of the 2 different campaigns combined. So,
but what's neat about it is, and that's kind of interesting, because not only does that mean my character and me as a player has sort of seen other parts of the world, maybe more than anybody else who's currently in Khassan, but also he was sort of marked and then chased and then oppressed by the way Edicts runs the world, right? The way he,
so he's a very much a typical beholder in a lot of ways. He likes to collect things. He likes rare things. He's ridiculously paranoid. I can read, I don't know if you want me to read the blurb now about kind of what I read to my players. Let's get into that,
because we're kind of in the reign of Edicts, right?
Right. And so this is,
what's that about?
So the reign of Edicts is also the year we're in now. I steal my calendar from the world of Greyhawk, which, you older people will remember. And so when I throw out months and times, you might recognize those months. But the year is actually 157 RE, and that means we're 157 years into the reign of Edicts. And I'm just going to read you real quick. This is what the handout I give to my players when I start this world, just to give them a little history on what's going on. I'll share this in the screen too, so you guys can see this. This is just a little picture of Edicts, or maybe it's a general picture of a beholder. We haven't actually seen Edicts in action yet in any of my campaigns. So, but there are tales that tell of a time before Edicts, the time of the 11 kingdoms, but that was over a century and a half ago. Most were not yet born or care not to trifle over the past, save the dwarves with their long memories and the elves with their even longer lives. However, for those who do listen, much may be learned. It started in the heart of the realm. A purplish-black miasma spilled forth and crept its way across the land. Who was the unfortunate soul or souls that discovered this source is not known, but it was learned the cloud carried within it the walking dead, driven forward by its creator, a lich lord. Panic gripped the kingdoms and their rulers. Champions sent out failed to return as the threat grew ever greater. That is when Edicts appeared, the creature that became to be known as Beholder and the future emperor. It promised to destroy the lich and in return order from chaos. All it wanted as payment was the land now occupied by their enemy, a desolate mountain range that none desired. A great council met. The decision made that day would change everything. Not all agreed to the terms laid forth. The elves would have nothing to do with such an abomination or its plan, and so they parted along with their great city, returning to the Feywild. It was the Dragonborn who protested the fiercest, declaring themselves a sovereign kingdom. They retreated back to their mountain fortress in the protection of the ancient worm Eversun that watches over it. The Dwarf King was the last of the remaining rulers to agree, but he would be the first to dread that day. It is told he cursed the Beholder with his dying breath. For all that, Edicts was true to his word. The undead lord was never heard of again, along with the necrotic storm and his minions within it. However, it was not long after the realm's newest ruler's influence began to grow, as did his followers. Hordes of humanoids flocked to his call, legions of hobgoblins and more at his command. Binding treaties were negotiated as fortresses seemingly sprouted from the earth, further strengthening the Beholder's position. Time passed. The Dwarf Kingdom fell after years of war, and the others bent to their new emperor's will. The reign of Edicts had begun. And so that's the backstory of what is going on in this realm in general. And if you note on the map here, those of you are not looking at the map, there are these inner cities, I guess, in the map closer to the center where the Emperor's Tower is. And those are actually military cities that all belong to
those are the gray ones on the map, right?
Yeah, they're the gray ones. I'm sorry, that belong to various legions of hobgoblins. And so the legion and these hobgoblins have presence in all the other kingdoms, and it varies depending on the kingdom how they handle that presence. But think of the Empire's infiltration in Star Wars into all these different worlds. They in Star Wars or systems they call them. But here we're talking about kingdoms.
And each like one inner systems that are under complete control of the Empire at that time, like Coruscant, stuff like that.
Right. And so and nobody really sees the Emperor because he's paranoid, but he has all kinds of representatives that are out and about doing it's kind of like the Emperor in Star Wars. You don't really see him until the very end. I don't know if I stole that on purpose from that or that was in my subconscious because I grew up with all that stuff. So, but he's there hanging out. And various things have happened in the campaign going forwards, but that's where we stand as far as the backstory going for this land.
Right. And so I think we should spend most of our time talking about the campaign we're going to start sharing, which is Khassan, which is a particular part of the world down in the lower right-hand corner of the map here. But what are some of the big events that maybe occurred in some of the prior campaigns that are important for listeners to understand, to give them a little bit of context for what's going on in Khassan?
So the biggest things that happened in the world is that the parties have figured out, that have went through the various. One, Edict's not a good dude. Two, his minions aren't particularly good dudes. They involve themselves in slavery. A lot of the kingdoms, some of the kingdoms have a stronger stance against that than others. And so that affects their relationship. But to this point, Edicts hasn't pressed for an all-out war to try to wipe out any one of these kingdoms. But one of the biggest things that was discovered by, we refer to it as the SKU campaign because of the last names that were involved in that campaign. But by those parties, they actually discovered that Edicts was, and to a little bit, Namfoodle figured this out too, but that Edicts is messing with the ways or the inner planes. So the inner planes are your Shadowfell and your Feywild, and then also the elemental chaos. But for the most part, he's messing with the Shadowfell and the Feywild specifically. And so they discovered he actually pulled a island from the Feywild and swapped it with an island in Ralcor, which is these kingdoms or the Prime. So when I play, you'll hear me refer to planes and realms. Planes are what the academia refer to as these other levels of existence, and most of the laymen refer to them as realms. So the prime realm or the prime material plane is so Edicts apparently swapped these to gain resources from the island called Harmony that he swapped for the Ashen Core, which is on the eastern coast, which is closer to where Namfoodle was. Mm-hmm. Now, this is an important event because Nam's starting to learn, and others are starting to learn, that the veil or the whatever separates these inner planes and the primal plane is starting to weaken, which is very important to the Way Watchers, which we can get into more detail moving forward.
In the very first episode you guys are going to hear, which is interesting. It's sort of a side quest. We still see that. We see it comes to be a very big part of that scene. And there's also right after that, you'll see even more of that. And so it's interesting. It's been sort of a subtle theme, and he did a really good job of making it subtle in the beginning, and then becoming more bold and more of a problem for us now.
And one of the things I'm not sure Nam/Russ is aware of, but his entry into this Sands of Khassan game, which he entered at the very beginning, there really wasn't anything going on before that except for backstory. The date he entered and his coming from one plane through the Shadowfell and ending up in Khassan was the same day that Edicts swapped these islands.
Ooh, Nam had not figured that out.
So there was a major disruption in the between the planes, which caused this other disruption, which was very nearby, actually. You're talking 50 to 60 miles away between Hornstog, where you are, and this Ashen Core got switched for Harmony. So that was a big, and that was basically part of the beginning of the other characters' campaign, the other players' campaign, affecting your switching into the beginning of this campaign. So they're all kind of happening around the same time, which right now in different parts of the world is easy to manage. We'll see how that is moving forward, and how much each person is involved, each player is involved. Because the way I look at it as a DM is whoever's more actively playing is going to take precedence. So if I have to adjust one of the other campaigns that haven't been actively playing, I will have time pass or something, and they can tell me what they do over those months or whatever happened, so they can catch up. So we're not kind of retroing things that are happening within the world. But that's my plan if it comes up. So
yeah, awesome. Well, maybe it's time to talk about Nam a little bit, because we've mentioned him several times, and this is sort of he sort of showed up, or was around right at this big event. I think he was level 5 when that event.
Well, he was level 5. So this campaign, the Sands of Khassan campaign, started at level 5. And I chose to do that because I had played a variety of games as a player and as a DM, getting my players up to the 5th, 6th, 7th level area. And I really wanted to start working with those higher levels. And so I wasn't really interested in the pre-level.
Yet another start at level 1 situation.
Yeah, the pre-hero levels. I want to deal with heroes. And so I wanted these people to be established, and it worked out well because Nam, why wouldn't we use the same character that Russ started, because he was into that character, and we're not really playing that campaign. That campaign's not active at this time, and those characters have kind of gone on to do their own thing and made up NPCs kind of in my world, which is really cool. So it wasn't like a waste of time or anything. It was actually added a lot of fluff and stuff to the game, and it added Nam. So Nam, I don't know if you want to tell us about Nam and his backstory.
I can tell you a little bit about my inspiration for Nam, and help me remember as we talk about which happened where, because it's a little fuzzy. Because it was a few years ago when we first did the first one there.
Oh yeah, it's been quite some time.
So when you first were asking us, hey, I'd love to run a campaign with Russ, you and the kids, and here's sort of and you gave us sort of a framework of the world, and you basically said we could pick anything. Whenever a new supplement comes out for D&D, you get all excited. Oh, thank you for popping Nam up there. You got all excited for, so those of you watching the video, you can see there's a little portrait of Namfoodle. We make all of our portraits, by the way, with Hero Forge, which is a great tool, which you can actually get your model 3D printed. But if you don't do that, you can make these really cool pictures very easily, even if you're not an artist, which I really like.
I also use them a lot for specialized NPCs.
Yeah, I do too in my campaigns. It's fun. You can get someone looking just right, and they can do all kinds of crazy stuff with wings and steeds and everything. Anyway, so at that time, as you mentioned, the supplement just come out, and it had introduced the Arcane Archer, or brought it back to 5th edition, I should say. And I was like, man, I like archers. I've always liked rangers. But I don't want to make just another ranger. So I'd really like to play an Arcane Archer. But one of the things that I like to do with characters is I'm not a min-max player. So I don't look at the class I want to play and find out the optimal race for that class, and then figure out, what would be the right combination to really be as deadly as humanly possible. Rather, I like to play things that are either a little unique or different, or kind of give me a handicap in some ways, just to be different and fun. And so the idea was that I wanted to make a gnome, and I hadn't played a gnome in a long time. So I was like, wouldn't it be fun to play a gnome? And what if this gnome was extremely self-important and felt like almost incompensating for his size, but he also always dreamed of being basically a wood elf. And he really always wanted to be an elven archer, and maybe he grew up around elves or respected elves. And he wanted to be, and I wanted his backstory to be really stuck into some organization that he just believed in 100%. I was just totally all bought in, whether they were good or bad. He was just, that's it. This organization is right. They're true. Like almost like a zealot for that organization. But he was a good guy. So he's kind of chaotic good, meaning he does the right thing and he follows the laws of his organization, but that might be antithetical to the law of the land. So for example, which is kind of interesting, like Edux is the law of the land, right? And this gets to really interesting stuff. Like if the law is the law, would a lawful good character ever break the law? But a chaotic good character could break the law of the land to do what's right? And operate outside of it. And so when John was sharing how oppressive the world was, I was like, well, I want to operate outside of that and be good, but I also want to be a little bit almost like dopily dedicated to this one concept or idea. And I thought one of the things that could be fun, and since gnomes are kind of known as tinkerers, the other thing I wanted to do is maybe this Arcane Archer class, maybe a lot of the abilities and cool stuff, doesn't come necessarily from being elven. It comes from the fact that he's tricked out his bow to compensate for the fact that he's not an elf. And so he can do some elven things. And so as Namfoodle leveled up over time, John would work with me to be like, John, because Namfoodle thinks he's an elf, I want to be able to have this sort of elven ability, but maybe it's on the gnome, which is actually more in line with newer editions of Dungeons and Dragons, right? They're less locked into, nope, you're not playing an elf, so you can't use that. And they're kind of let you craft more. So I like that direction of D&D actually. But in any case, it's been fun doing that. And I forget which of us sort of said, let's do the Way Watchers. I think it was you.
That was you. Yeah, that was you. That was you. That wasn't me.
Oh, cool. So I think there was something about teleportation. I was like, I wanted to be able to go through because in my other campaign, we're just doing a bunch of worlds. So I was like, I want to be able to bounce around. And that's when you said, well, in my world, they're called the Ways, and here's how they work. And that was really fascinating to me. So we ended up creating this organization called the Way Watchers, and their job was to defend the Ways and make sure everything was working well and that things weren't going wrong.
So yeah, so there's natural portals between the inner planes and the prime material plane. They're just like weak spots, and they usually have something that's been discovered by the party now is they usually have some sort of key on both sides, like a similar object on both sides that allows them, whether it's a type of plant in the forests and stuff where he grew up in, like Nettlebriar, or a type of tree or something that is like has a mirror image, it doesn't have to be the exact thing, but some sort of thing that keeps it open. And so what the Way Watcher's job was before the elves left 150 years ago was to watch to make sure things didn't come into the prime material plane that weren't supposed to be doing. But now most of the Way Watchers, which is kind of neat that Nam is kind of one of the last ones left in the prime material plane. Most of the Way Watchers left with Aramo, which was the Elven kingdom, back to the Feywild, and they're still guarding the same ways, but they're guarding them the other way around now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what's super cool. So it's been interesting as a plot point, Nam was and Nam was involved with other party, and he was sort of early on marked by edicts, and so he sort of started to really see personally some of the oppression going on there, and he started to see also that maybe some of this stuff was going to be a negative effect on the ways, and so that was his number one thing. Now he's addicted to the ways to a point, or not addicted is the wrong word. He's so passionate for the Way Watchers and so loyal to the Way Watchers. He will accept no other. And this has started to manifest itself as a little bit of a problem for him as he will accept none before the Way Watchers. Like that's his most loyal organization. And he almost treats them as a deity, right? That's just sort of who he's loyal to. And so there's been some recent events that have sort of been, asking for him to sort of not shift his loyalty, but even when he met up with the Chosen the first time, he won't self-identify as a Chosen. He'll never say he's a Chosen. And as other influential gods or lesser deities or others start to dole out favors to the party, if those favors require him admit his loyalty or fealty, he will not, because he has one fealty, and that is to the Way Watchers. So that's sort of his personality. Oh, and a couple of things we should mention. So he does have an affinity for small animals, which has sort of grown to bigger animals as he's leveled up. And so he usually tries to have an animal companion of some type. Early on in the campaign, he found this albino chipmunk. And I forget how this showed up. There was this albino chipmunk that somehow was surviving inside this ebony bramble part of Jade Wood. That you guys and the rest of your companions had ventured into, and so he kind of stood out by like a sore thumb, but somehow had survived, all the predators around in that area. And I think it was because that was one of those happenstance things where I had talk with small animals and were trying to find someone, and I was like, "Hey, John, is there any small animals around I can talk to?" And you're like, "Yeah, there's this albino chipmunk." And so I talked to him, and then I sort of befriended him, and then he started hanging out, and I named him Snow Fury. So I had this white chipmunk in the prior campaign hanging out with me, and this becomes important later because so his Nam then, so he befriends this animal. Then now fast forward, Nam gets well, before I do that, John, did I miss anything big about the prior campaign? Is there any other
no, well, there is something relevant. When edicts swap the islands and you show up, so right at session 1 of the game, when you show up, you're one of your past companions, Sephiroth, 2 of your companions were dealing with the Shadowfell. One was being hunted by things and the other one seemed to have a connection to something in the Shadowfell. And so when the island swapped, a portal opened up, and Sephiroth, the companion you were involved with, he reminds you very much of Azrael. He was one of these Azamars that wears a mask and everything, and he seemed to be fighting between 2 different versions of himself all the time when you traveled with him. And anyway, he was being this shadow portal or a portal to the Fell opened up, and he was dealing with it when you tried to help him. And he basically had told you to not, he didn't need your help, go back. And he even so much that when you tried to come and help him in the Shadowfell, as he had these tentacles drawing him in, he actually did a thunder wave to throw you, ideally to throw you out of the portal. And at that time, you heard the name Rama Schooled, which may or may not become important later. And you also saw the eye of a raven in the background, which now is becoming more relevant in your current thing, what's going on. And he was pulled into it, and you were thrown out of it. But interestingly, you were not thrown out back in Hornstog where you are. You were thrown out in the Sands of Khassan near our other two characters, which I don't know if you want to move into that now, but those are the other 2 people involved.
Yeah, let's move into that now. So Nam gets thrown through. He does have Snow Fury with him at the moment.
Yes, he does.
And he's level 5 at that time. I think
correct. And the other two players started at level 5 because we started with 3 players.
So let's talk about this. So let's fast forward to Khassan now. So we talked about Nam and the history of the realm and the Reign of Edicts. Tell us a little bit about this realm that that Namfoodle just sort of bamfed into. Was Khassan always part of the world in your mind, or was it something you added as you started talking about the campaign with the new players?
So Khassan was one of the original kingdoms that I had put on my map. Yep. But as I stated before, I had ideas what Khassan would be, but it was one of those things where like, all right, we're going to start a new game within my same world. Let's focus on this place that's about as far away from Hornstag as you can be on the map, so as not to interfere with things that might be going on the other side of the world. So that was kind of one of my, so it's down in, so Hornstag, where the other campaigns had primarily happened, is up towards the northwest, and Khassan is all the way down at the northeast. And Khassan is a desert kingdom. It's very, like I said before, it's very based on Akrabar and Aladdin and kind of that Turkish style with Arabian, mixed in there type of thing. And so again, very fantasy based, not really based except for some visual things, but not really based on what's what exists in our real world. Just the idea to get a new visual, instead of the same old kingdoms over and over again. So what's going on in Khassan? So Khassan is run by a sultan who is now the difference between Khassan and some of the other kingdoms that we won't go into detail because those are other campaigns, but Khassan has very much embraced edicts and what's going on. And there is very much a lot of different social hierarchies in Khassan, and the wealthy are doing great, including the sultan, and taking advantage of edicts' presence and the availability to move goods and manipulate certain things, including slave trade and black market trade and all kinds of bad stuff. And the wealthy are having a really good time because they're living large. And then there's the poor unfortunates, which we refer most of the time as the unfortunates. But there's the poor and people just fighting to survive, and they're treated like less than and treated horribly by the sultan, mostly by the sultan and his people. But in general, the city kind of just ignores them, even though they're valuable to the city. And so that's kind of the state of Khassan. Now, what starts our campaign is that they have this thing going on in the Kingdom of Khassan that every 13 years, there's from the wastelands, the very south of Khassan, there's a mountain ridge that kind of splits. It creates a border, a mountain range, I should say. But on the other side of that mountain range is these wastelands, and there's these insectoid-like creatures they refer to as the Myrid that come up to feed every 13 years. So it's this massive wave. Think of like a locust plague, but like humanoid type insects that come up to try to feed and they try to move up the Abassi River, which is where Khassan is right next to, and work their way to the capital and just eat their way into becoming larger and greater, Myrid or swarm, if you think of it that way. So what our players are coming into, how this starts is we have two players. So you want me to jump into who these players are? These two other characters.
Yeah. So let's jump into the two players, and these two players are going to be in a group called the Chosen, right? So
well, see, that's interesting. You think of them as the Chosen, but I didn't give them the name the Chosen. That was actually Aurelius gave them that name, which is one of the characters / players.
So did you have in your mind that the Sultan would send the Chosen down to fight off this plague?
So yeah. So what happens is every 13 years, the Sultan creates like kind of a lottery. So this is kind of a Hunger Games kind of thing, not individual, but mass groups of it, where they basically do a lottery with a bunch of unfortunates, so the poor of Khassan, and then penal, like prisoners of Khassan, the penal troops, and they take a bunch of each of those groups, and they send them down to Hell's Gate. So this all happens at a place called Hell's Gate, where this surge of swarm of Myrid hits Hell's Gate, which is again, it's buried in the mountain range. And so they go to Hell's Gate, and Hell's Gate Hell's Gate is meant to fend off this swarm. So what happens is they send down the unfortunate group with the promise that any of that survive will be rewarded with a better life when they return to Khassan. They'll be rewarded with housing, jobs, money, food, and then the prisoners that go down there, they're going to get pardons, and they're going to get to restart their lives again. Then also going with them are what we call or referred to as glory seekers. There's an arena in Khassan A lot of it's like, kind of like gladiatorial slave combat, but also there's also just some individuals that want to join into it. And so the glory seekers go down there to say they've been in this survive the Myriad, so when they get introduced in these gladiatorial combat, they can be a survivor of the Myriad wave. Now, with all those things being said, there's a very important artifact at Hell's Gate that helps defeat the Myriad. And I will read about that in a second. But just to answer your question, the Sultan, it's really a Sultan's representative, one of his elite guard called the Mojir, a commander of the elite guard, usually selects actual veteran adventurers to guard the artifact during these waves and when the Myriad comes. And so that's their role. So they are.
You had that concept set. You're like, okay, so I'm going to run this next campaign and I'm going to get a couple players to participate. And in your mind, they're going to be selected by the Sultans to be. You didn't call them the chosen, but you were like, there'll be some adventurers.
Well, they are. This is how it started. They are chosen by the Sultan.
Got it.
So they aren't. I didn't refer to them as the chosen, but that word came up when these are the individuals chosen by the Sultan. And so Joe, the player, and his character we'll talk about in just a second. So he glommed onto that term, the chosen, and he was like, we are the chosen of the Sultan. So that's where that first started. So it has evolved like 3 times now. So we're in the 3rd evolution of the chosen, which hopefully we'll get to explain. But the 2 characters involved. So I have the Aurelius or Auric Drake, and then the other character is Kaldaka Takran. So these are the 2 original characters that were these veteran adventurers that were chosen by the Mojir. So the Mojir are like these elite knights of the Sultan. They're also referred to by the people of Khassan as the hand of the Sultan. So by them choosing them, it's technically the Sultan that chose them. So there's how that all connects together. Mm-hmm. So Aurelius Drake is a altered human. So I think he's either from the DMG or he's from the New Tashas, where like Russ was saying that not every specific race has specific things. So he actually has dark vision. He's kind of based off The Witcher. Joe went with. That's why he has the white hair and he has the dark vision. But his class, so he's human with dark vision to start, but his class is actually a blade singer. And so the blade singers of this world of Ralcor, they come from a temple, and this was created by the players, which is how they add to my realm. They come from a temple called Saucil. And this temple is made up of these blade singers. So there's these fighters that also are arcane wizards. So if you are not unfamiliar with the blade singer, it is a subclass of the wizard that actually can fight to a certain degree. They're performers too. They do this specialized dance as they, so it's like a dancing combat thing, which allows them to be light on their feet. And so they're kind of a dex-based, intelligence-based class. But in Saucil, to protect their blade singers, they also train monks. So they have a sect of monks in there, the Way of the Hand, actually, I believe it is, if you're looking for the subclass. And they train these individuals to also work with and travel with the blade singers as kind of their protectors, and they're also their kind of companions, because they have different skill sets, but also some similar ones. And so that's where Kaldaka comes in, or Cal, we call him. Aurelius, we sometimes just call Auric, but those are the 2 guys we're referring to. And so they actually knew each other ahead of time. Cal actually has traveled, his backstory has traveled much of Ralcor, including some of the military cities of the Hobgoblins, but he has a little bit of a history with Khassan. So he was himself an unfortunate, or one of the kind of the poor of Khassan, and grew up in the streets of Khassan. So he has some history there, and you'll hear us refer to that. And he even started establishing a group within Khassan that he was training, kind of like he called like a peasant army, but kind of like he was trying to train some of the unfortunate that would let him in order to do his skills and be like monks, because you don't need necessarily, really fancy weapons in order to protect yourself. The other thing you should know about Cal is actually a shifter. Now, shifters don't actually exist in my world. So Cal actually his story is interesting. He actually came from a different world. Could have been Eberron. We don't know. But he actually, which is where the shifter comes from, which book, but he actually came from a different world and was part of this whole culture of where they use shifters as trackers and everything. And so his whole family was that. And he ended up kind of like Nam, but this was years and years ago, of actually changing from a different world within the planes to this actual world. So he's from a different book as well. So Aurelius, most of his stuff is from Tasha's, and Cal, most of his stuff is from Eberron, although the monk is a basic class. So that's both of their backstories. Did you need any more depth on them, Rush, you think?
No, I think that's good. I think that's good to get everybody started. I mean, they'll learn more about it.
And so they were chosen. They were offered 1,000 gold each if they were successfully guard the bell. And let's go to that now. So the bell is the artifact, also known as, I'm going to pull it up here because it's unfortunately, I'm not always into simple names. So I pick names that I sometimes have trouble with.
This is why we need Roll20 so it can track all these names.
But yeah, so I have all my things open here. I just got to find it. So it is called Sharifa al-Kazi is the name of the artifact. And I will share this with you all. So this is the handout. This was the teaser I sent out to this group with Russ and Joe, and Greg is the name of the player that plays Cal. And so this is the teaser that I sent out, this little poem. And this was translated from ancient Kalashite. Kalashite is the human race that I got the idea for how I was going to, decide what the culture and what these guys look like in Khassan. And that's straight out of the player's handbook. And so it was found on a stone tablets of what they called Amanula. And so this reads as, when 13 seasons have taken their turns, the mirrored comes with a hunger that burns. Beneath the sands they gather and wait, a blood moon, the signal to beset hell's gate. Thrice-stricken Sharifa al-Kazi must be, thrice it is she must sing to thee, once to warn of the coming doom, once to break spirits with a thunderous boom, and once to draw forth the mirrored queen, so that she may be brought low beneath the moon sheen. And so this is the process they have to go through every 13 years to stop the mirrored from breaking through Hell's Gate and moving along the river and eventually reaching Khassan and destroying the kingdom. And so that was the premises of how everything started.
Yeah, and so that was how we all came together. Namfoodle sort of bamfed in right as they were
right. So what was happening is Auric and Cal were traveling along with a guide named Huda, who was taking them to Hell's Gate. And they had stopped at one of the last water sites, an oasis, before they would get to Hell's Gate. And unfortunately, at that time, every time these 13 years roll around, there's a lot of migration to the south as they prepare for these myriads coming. And so there was a goblin band taking advantage of that at the waterhole. And that's where Nam showed up at the same time that they were doing battle with these goblins. And so one of the things I like to do at the beginning of all of my campaigns is I try to stick my players, if they want to know each other, that's fine. And that makes it easier. But I try to give them the shared trauma thing, because a lot of times you can bind people together and make companionship when you share trauma. And so I try to put them in situations where they're kind of stuck together for a few levels. And that allows them to find that binding, reason to bind together. In this case, it was being kind of stuck at Hell's Gate. So Nam shows up, he hears about what's going on at Hell's Gate, and he's like, well, this must be why, because he believes the ways are always kind of directing him where he wants to go. Exactly. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
That is correct.
And so he pops out of nowhere and shows up in the middle of this. And he's like, well, I must be here to help you guys out. And there was another member traveling with him who was a scribe. He actually, I don't even know if Nam remembers this. His name was Callum, and he was a priest of the Raven Queen.
Yes.
And he was actually going to Hell's Gate to study what happens to individual souls when they die, because everybody knows that many people die at Hell's Gate when these myriads come. So he thought that would be a great place to do research. He wasn't intricately involved in the things that then transpired at Hell's Gate, but he was one of the original people that was traveling with them.
Yeah, and so let's fast forward now to what happened at Hell's Gate and the big events that sort of transpired there, especially the things that might relate to what's going on now. One of the things that happened with Nam, which ended up being sort of interesting, was I, as a player, was so focused on the new world, and actually Nam ended up befriending a giant desert snake.
Yeah, that happened a little bit later, but it did happen. So what happened when you first got there is you immediately So there's a fort adjacent to Hell's Gate. Hell's Gate is kind of like this giant gate fortress that's buried in the mountains, but also near it is this fortress called Jahanom. And this is kind of where all the different forces gather. And they do give them some training. They try to give the unfortunates training with bows and archery and crossbows to be able to do range damage. And then they train the penal legion or the prisoner soldiers in the hand-to-hand combat type thing. And obviously the glory seekers are set to do that too. Now the people that became known as the Chosen, the one that were selected by the Sultan, their job is to protect, as we said, this bell, Sharifa al-Qazi. So they kind of have their own work there. But the first thing they realized when they got there was that there's all these different class distinctions going on. Both the penal troops were behind barbed wire and being trained, and the unfortunates are treated like crap. And Nam, being Nam, tried to slip Huda some money, some coin. Mm-hmm. And that turned into a later saga where Huda got in trouble because she's not supposed to have coin as an unfortunate. And this is kind of the stuff you're dealing with. There's a lot of oppression going on. But one of the other things they did is they ended up, so when they got there, they were met by these Mojir. And so the Mojir, they were met by, just throw up some more slideshow stuff. That's not what I want. The Mojir, this person has an X next to their name because they killed her. But this is Commander Saida Shafa Alabasa. So she was the commander of the Mojir that they dealt with mostly when they got down there. The Mojir were there to oversee things, but they immediately learned that the Mojir weren't planning on being involved in any actual combat, which is, something interesting in itself. And they also met the captain of Jahanom, and now he's assigned to this Jahanom all the time. He and his troops are actually part of the regular guard that stay down at Hell's Gate to kind of keep it stocked and make sure there's no other types of creatures that work their way through. And Captain, so they met Captain Jazir and the Genome, and they immediately found out that there was a problem because, these things never go smoothly. And some jackal wares had snuck in during the evening and made off with the clapper of the artifact. So, the clapper, for those of you who doesn't know, is the thing that hangs down, that rings back and forth and actually makes the sound on the bell. And so the bell is not going to function without its clapper. So Sharifa al-Qazi is not going to work. So immediately when they got there, they were off on not a side quest because this involved with what they were supposed to be doing, but they weren't, and the Mirrors were a week or so away from showing up, maybe a little bit more time than that. And so who they were introduced at that point to a very important NPC or figure with what's going on now, and that is Zolara Kafet. So Zolara was among the unfortunates, but she stood out. She was the one training them with their bows. She was obviously very adept at a bow. And it turns out she knows this territory like the back of the hand. And she's a very good scout in the sands of Khassan. And so the commander assigned Zolara to our players and said, you need to go track down this clapper before the Mirrors show up, because we're all going to be in big trouble if we can't work the bell, because that's the only way we know how to end this actual fight without the Mirrors swarming up along the river. So off our adventurers went with Zolara. And so there were a variety of things that occurred that are pivotal to what's going on now in Khassan that happened on this quote unquote side adventure to get the clapper. And the first thing that is important, and you can throw in any of these questions, Russ, at the time, if you have any but otherwise you want me to roll into them.
Oh, no. No, I think that's great. Let's jump into the big pivotal stuff. I want to make sure everybody gets good setting for what's happening.
Right. So the big thing that happened while looking for this clapper is that they discovered there are two banished Lamia sisters out in these wastes.
Yeah.
One of them hanging out in a ruined temple of Grzat, I don't know if he's exactly part of it, but he's the demon lord of pleasure. I did not make him up. He just exists in the player's handbooks, and he's been around for almost as long as D&D's been around. Mm-hmm. So she was the one there who actually, and it was her jackal wares that had actually taken the clapper. So our party ends up doing what the adventure party does. and they end up going in after the clapper, and it's a bit of a standoff. And so she tries to negotiate with the party, like, hey, I'll give you this staff if you take care of my sister. Now her sister doesn't live too far away. She's also exiled in the same desert wastes of Khassan. And so they're like, if you take my sister, she goes by the Duchess. And so the original sister they're dealing with is the priestess Azriela, and her sister is the Duchess Romana. And so those names are kind of important, and they'll be important as we move forward. So that's why I'm sharing them with you. So the party goes off to deal with. Actually, I think that when they come out of the temple, this is where the Unkar, Namfudal's latest pet, comes, because
yes,
his sister's forces are there too. So you have the Jackalwares working with the priestess Azrella, who's the Lamia with her upper body's a woman and her bottom half's a lion. The other Lamias are all upper half women and bottom half serpent. And so they all work with the Duchess, who is the similar, make, I guess. But so when they come out, they get jumped by the sisters' forces, and they end up, then they have a monstrous snake from them, which is from one of the expanded player handbooks. Thank you to the guild. And so the monstrous snake they end up keeping it, and Nam ends up swaying it to work for him.
Yeah, so I ride him around like a horse.
I don't remember how he pulled those shenanigans, but they happened.
Yeah,
and part of me is just like,
there was an animal. It might have been an animal.
I'm sure there was a really high animal check thing that you rolled out of your mind.
So now I'm like Maudib. I ride around on a worm in the desert.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But also, there's just something cool about one of your players riding along on a snake, and they ended up putting saddlebags on the side. So this just.
Well, then you get these awkward situations where the snake's hungry, and
we
really need all these camels. Maybe we could just feed him one.
Yeah. So that I kind of think of the snake as just fun. And at the time, we only had 3 players, and I'm like, well, they can really use the snake because I can just throw more stuff at them. So anyway, they end up going to face the Duchess Romana, to kill her and then they end up fighting with her and actually working a better deal, because the Azrelia wasn't really going to give them anything to do it. And whereas Romana's like, hey, I will do this. I'll give you my entire horde. You can have the clapper, because there was some question about that too, because Azrelia wanted it for something. So that was part of the negotiation still kind of open.
Was also like a powerful staff, right? Like,
well, it turns out a clapper for an ancient huge bell is the perfect size of a staff.
Right.
And so you guys later found out this clapper was actually like a staff of insect summoning, which kind of makes sense. It controls insects, and they use it to control the myriad, which are insects.
The myriad, right.
So it was also a powerful staff, but she wanted it for another purpose, which you guys figured out later. But anyway, they decided to work with the Duchess. So important things here are they decided to work with the Duchess. Not only did she pay them for killing her sister, and they could have the clapper, she paid them all their money for a future service of killing the Sultan's vizier. So the Sultan's vizier is another Lamia.
I thought this was brilliant, because you basically set us up for the next quest, right? Like,
right. So this is where the deal
the next
comes
breadcrumb you got to follow.
Right. So I'm going to read you the deal. So I keep this as a handout for my players.
But I was going to say too that, so at this point, Namfudal and Russ didn't really know if Aurelius and Cal, Joe and Greg's characters, actually liked the Sultan. It was a little fuzzy, because Joe's character Aurelius would walk around like, yes, we are the chosen. Yes, we
right.
And so Nam was a little bit of a Nam wasn't sure about where they were on this whole thing. So when this offer came along, which was, hey, I want you to go to Khassan and take out the Sultan eventually, Nam was all over this, because Nam recognized with the oppression that we saw in the, as you described.
Well, one of the things we kind of skipped over as you traveled with Zolara, right. She started to share her concerns. She also started to share with you how life was in Khassan and what the Sultan was like. But she also started to share with you her concerns and questions about how the whole Hell's Gate situation goes.
Right.
Because they say the survivors return and the prisoners are given pardon, but barely any prisoners ever survive.
And no one ever comes back.
And it's only, there's 1 to 3 unfortunates that kind of on average survive and live these better lives, but it's not really a lot.
It's like the Hunger Games. Who really gets to go live in that fancy spot?
Exactly. So she was starting to question and she was starting to find things out, and she started to share that with you because you guys seem to be leaning
Nam was
towards
really pushing for this because Nam really wanted, because Nam remembered edicts and all that stuff, and he's like, look, we gotta this Khassan thing is almost certainly part of that nonsense, and so we got to start weakening this thing. And what I didn't know for sure is if Aurelius and Cal would be all into it or not. And so in this situation, Nam was really pushing for siding with the second sister because he really wanted to go after was looking for an excuse to go after the Sultan the whole time.
Well, yeah, and I'm pretty sure that Aurelius / Joe and Cal / Greg sided with the sister because she was giving them money.
Right.
Pretty much. Everybody's got their own motivation.
Which was well played by the dungeon master, by the way.
But it was kind of funny with Aurelius specifically, Joe's character, because in the beginning, and this is how the Chosen thing started, he's all like, we're the Chosen of the Sultan. We get to do what we want. And he's quickly found out declaring you're the Chosen of the Sultan didn't look so good with most people besides maybe the Mojir. But everybody else was kind of like, yeah, whatever, okay, whatever, good for you. And they kind of looked down on them like they, or looked at them suspiciously like they did the Sultan. So here's the deal. I'm going to read out to you real quick for those of you who can't see it. I'm share this to players, but I have this with this little.
It's literally the deal. It's not just like.
Yeah, and I've got a scroll that I've grabbed from the interweb there that is kind of glowing and looks ominous. So I got that as
signing a deal with a demon. It's a classic situation. We all knew what we were doing.
The deal was agreed upon in Duchess Romana's lair that was called the Viper's Pit. In return for her hoard, Cal, Oric, Nam, and Zolara would eliminate her younger sister, the priestess Australia, so she's still alive, remember, to be found at the ruined temple of Grazit, which is where they just came from. The same group would then travel to the capital Khassan to remove her elder sister, Nafora El Zura, daughter of the Lamia Queen Zura, and advisor / companion to the vizier, to the Sultan Pardid Bashar. To receive aid in this challenging endeavor, the Duchess told the four to seek out Filigir, who comes into play a lot now. So Filigir, who could be found at the Stout Brewery in the capital. Additionally, the Serpent Lamia informed them that there are 3 major organizations that run the city for the Sultan. To get to the Sultan and Nafor, it would be best to draw him out by affecting the flow of coin from his best contributors. The first is the Maelstrom, which they're currently dealing with as you catch up to these things. The Maelstrom are a black market gang of smugglers, thieves, and illicit item dealers that trace their leadership back to Edix himself. Their local leadership is known as Yernev. All the gambling and exotic entertainment is run by the Noble Serpent Guild, led by their Grand Master Nafora El Zura, that's her sister, the vizier to the Sultan and head of the mistresses, the head of the Sultan's harem. She's the mistress of them. The last group is the slave traders. Slave trade in Khassan is run by the mysterious Rakshasa and Lord Dahir he's their leader, to be more precise. So that was the deal they negotiated. They also learned from the Duchess that the reason the two sisters were exiled is together they tried to expose their older sister, or is it their younger sister? They tried to expose their sister that was the vizier to the entire Khassan that she was actually a Lamia, so they could get better standings themselves within the city of Khassan. And that backfired on them. And their mom got mad and exiled them in this desert. So that's why they're all there. So the way things played out is that our party did indeed follow through, and they did slay the other sister, the priestess Azrelia. They got the clapper. They got all their money, and they started their return to Hell's Gate now that they have the clapper. One of the things they discovered in dealing with the priestess is there was this statue, like the fingers of a large hand coming up through the sand, and Nam and Zolara. So Nam quickly found out that Zolara also has a connection to the ways. Yeah. And so they kind of had that in common, and kind of that helped bond them as well, because she could actually smell out planar openings, and so she has all kinds of weird little things that she could do.
Because Nam got excited about that too, because now he's like, oh, this is another reason why I'm here. So it started to become clear why he was involved with this somehow.
And so one of the things they had discovered on their way to Grazat's temple was this potential portal that was located at Torg's hand. He's a one of the gods that I use, the common gods. I didn't make up my gods, as you can see with Melora's ocean and so on. But Toric's hand was sticking up there, and there was like this seemingly portal there. And what they had discovered from Azraelia and the Duchess is that the staff can be used as a key to open up the portal. So, and as I mentioned before, in the planar portals, the ways, you have to have 2 matching keys or similar keys to open up both sides of it. And so what they decided to do was address this situation. So they opened up the portal, which went to the abyss, as they found out. But they were successful in getting the key on the other side, which was a staff of withering, and bringing it back through the portal and completely sealing the portal. They also learned that the edge of the portal was a teleportation circle, which was written down by the group. So that might come into later as a play too, once they get to the teleportation circle level. But then they returned back to Hell's Gate. And to kind of speed things up at Hell's Gate, they dealt with, so they had to wait for the mirror to come. They put the clapper back in. Their job was to guard the tower. One of the things that had happened in their absence is Huda, who Nam had become attached to, was their guide and was prominently supposed to be a guide. She got in trouble for having the coin on her because she was trying to help distribute it to other unfortunate. And so she was promptly ordered by the Mojir to join the unfortunate forces and was stuck out on one of these, on the front line at one of the forward outposts that are just outside of Hell's Gate, and they kind of detect the mirrored coming. So not a high level of life expectancy once you're discovered. So this didn't sit well with our heroes. So they actually made a heroic when the first waves of scout mirrored showed up, they came to her rescue and brought her back to the tower, which didn't work out during the main waves, and Huda passed away, which was Nam's greatest failing, because they tried to keep her alive as best they could, but with the type of weaponry that was being used by some of these evolved mirrored, they discovered that some of the mirrored were evolving each year. They had these acid breaths that unfortunately poor Huda couldn't survive.
And Nam was crushed by this, and he's not a bard. He tried to write a song. It was terrible. But yes, he was very, very, very...
So what leads us to where we are kind of now in Khassan is, so after our heroes did their job, the bell did its job, they fought the queen, they slayed the queen. They were promptly given their money. They even offered Nam money, and they were told that they could now return to Khassan as heroes. Meanwhile, and they also picked out some of the unfortunates and a couple penals or the prisoner warriors, and they were escorted with 2 Mojir headed to Khassan. The rest were remained, and at this point, the Mojir were trying to dismiss our heroes, but they were not having it, and so this is where they discovered that what really happens at Hell's Gate, because there was a lot of people alive still. Like there were hundreds of people still alive out of these thousands of people that were there. But what really happens to them is this is an ecosystem that they try to maintain. And so that by defeating the mirrored, they kill off a huge chunk of this horde, and the horde's going to start rebuilding for the next 13 years, as it turns out. But they also like to feed what's left of the horde so that they're not necessarily trying to come, still bash through the gate. So they take the survivors and they actually execute the survivors and they feed them to the mirrored. So not a nice thing. And not only do they will offer to them first that they can, swear a lifetime of servitude to Janon, so the cat, so they can become guard there. But if you choose not to become, they do that kind of before they let you know what the alternative is. And pretty much most of the prisoners, they don't care about. They just slaughter those guys and throw them out into the waste. So nothing nice was going on there. And so obviously our heroes stood up to that. And what they found an ally in the captain of Jahanon. He actually quickly turned to their side and stood up, and his men stood down, and he stood up. So you just had the commander, the Mojir commander, and like 3 other Mojir knights that were standing up against our heroes or our players. And the captain didn't involve himself, but he stood all his men down. He had hundreds of men too, and he stood them all down and let this standoff go. And obviously this went the way you would think it would go in Ostia. And so there was a battle. And during this battle, Zolara revealed herself. Now, we had heard rumors from other unfortunates that she was referred to as the Angel of Khassan because she had, prior to coming down here, she had been doing her best to help out the unfortunates by giving away food, healing people. She has some healing magic. and doing stuff like that amongst the unfortunates. And so they started referring to her as the Angel of Khassan. It was also learned, which I kind of skipped over, during the party's travels back from reclaiming the clapper, she shared with them that her kind of backstory, that she was actually chosen by an avatar or angel of Sahanine, the moon goddess, to remove the Sultan from power. Her job, but she didn't have any clue how to do that. And she kind of expressed to these three heroes, maybe you're how I can do this. You've already signed a deal to take out his vizier. What if we just took down the Sultan too? And so this is kind of how the whole thing came into place about taking care of the Sultan, which is what, as you find out when you join into
which sets us up for the whole
right, which is kind of what
everything we're doing now is to disrupt and cause trouble in Khassan itself.
So you basically have the party currently is working against the Sultan and also fulfilling their part of the deal. So it's kind of hand in hand at the moment. But the last thing that's important that happened at Hell's Gate was when the standoff happened and the inevitable battle happened, Zolara revealed that she is part celestial. She is Nazimar. She launched herself from the wall battlement she was on and showed her moon wings and aided our heroes in defeating the Mojir. And then they, discovered they have an ally in the captain whenever they, need this, to come to Jahum, and they always have a home there. Now, this is kind of far from any civilization, so maybe not the best place to call your headquarters, but there is a teleportation circle not too far away. So those are all kinds of things. So that leads us to Khassan. Do you have anything I should?
No, I think you got all the big stuff. Definitely.
All right.
So at this point, it's Nam's really excited because now we're going after the Sultan, which he thinks is the real problem of the whole situation.
And in breaking this up as a DM, Hell's Gate was chapter 1.
Yep.
Khassan is chapter 2. And so, interestingly, the party had a lot of choices when they arrived at Khassan, how they wanted to do this. And they did a move that may not seem super smart on the surface, but they marched into Khassan like they were Prince Ali.
Yes,
I reference
champions from turning victors, from war.
Right, and so they marched into this, and because word had started to spread, that of the return of the Angel of Khassan, she already had a history with them, and also what little somehow word beat them there of certain things about what happened in Hell's Gate. So they were kind of the people's champion. And they also stopped the Myriad. So they had all these things going for them. So they returned to all kinds of glory. And besides Cal, who decided to kind of sneak off and see who might be observing them, they walked into town like they owned it, and they promptly found themselves at a place you'll hear referred to, the Golden Camel, which is is the most expensive, elaborate
base of operations.
Right. It's the most elaborate. They have a suite there, which you'll see on maps as you dive into what's going on here if you have the video. But it's this elaborate, posh entire level of the top upper part of the hotel with its own servants and its own meals all involved. And they started dropping money right and left. It is in the inner city where the wealthy hang out, but there it is. So, but I don't know if Russ figured this out, but kind of coming in the way they did, they kind of created their own level of protection. Because what would happen if the Sultan just smoked these guys in front of everybody? That wouldn't look good. There might be some uprisings. Who knows what would happen? So it was kind of a smart move on their part, because if they had snuck into town and nobody really knew they were there and the Sultan figured it out, all kinds of backhanded stuff could have been going on. So to catch up what's going on, there's quite a few things going on in Khassan now. So they got there, they established kind of that they're staying at this fancy hotel, and they immediately jumped into trying to figure out what's going on and start dealing with the deal. And so there was Khaled kind of initiated, he rehooked up with one of the factions. So there's all these factions in Khassan that are going to play a role. And the way of kind of doing it is they depend on how involved and with the player is with each faction, whether that's donating money to the cause or actually doing certain things within the faction to make changes. That's going to affect their power level, current power level in the city. And then everybody has their own power level. The Sultan has his own power level, the Vizier has their own power level, and then groups have their own, like the Mojir have their own power level, Maelstrom has. And so that's all affected by things the players do whether that's monetary based things or actual actions they do. And that, when this all comes to a head, which is kind of what we think is going to happen, but who never knows in D&D, but if it all comes to a head, all those things are going to come into play. And so it's all very important. And so I actually have a faction ledger that I share with my players too, that I just popped up there just to Russ can scroll with it, but it lists, we don't need to go into all the detail, but it lists all the primary players, the individuals and the factions involved and what their kind of rating is. Currently, it's a 1 to 10 rating.
This is a brilliant way too, to take care of, I think there's 2 really interesting things that you did. Because you, so in some DMs, they limit the amount of magic items to control power, or they limit the amount of money you can get. And in your world, magic is pretty bountiful, and we're in a position where we're making lots of money pretty rapidly. However, because of what we're trying to do, it takes lots of money to accomplish what we're doing. So we have to end up deciding, do we want to sink lots of money into these various factions to help them with us? And so, Nam's donating money and trying to figure out ways he can help have the Way Watchers become more aware of what's going on here. Some of these other factions that are local that Nam has become enamored with also, because they help people who are maybe a little disenfranchised with the current situation. He wants to help those. Of course, the other characters all have meaningful relationships here. So this is really interesting. So even though we're making hey, you just took out this big beast and you made $5,000 each or something in gold, that's a drop in the bucket compared to the kind of money we need for some of this stuff. Combine this with the way you have done this really brilliant thing with magic items and the acquisition of magic items. There's many options for us to spend our gold on where I'm going.
Yeah. And so that was by design, actually. So what there's 2 things I'm doing in this campaign a little differently. I've always kind of I like to have my players have money, but I usually end up always giving magic items to them through combat or reward system. And I rarely ever do like a buying system, but Greg was constantly bugging me for new magic items. So I was like, all right, I'll come up with this other way to do it. So, because there's a lot of players that like to buy it. And so I figured, it's nice, it's nice to give all these players gold, but it's also nice to have stuff to spend it on, even though you have to make choices. The interesting thing with these factions so far, then you don't really have a particular faction you're associated with within the city, besides the Way Watchers, but they're not really in the city yet.
Right.
But
we're fixing that.
The funny thing is, if you think of gold as dollars and silver as dimes and copper as pennies, most of the players are throwing dimes and pennies at these factions. So it doesn't move the needle very much. It takes 500 to 1,000 to really start moving the needle. Whereas a character we haven't introduced yet, but we'll introduce. So my son's character, Azrael, is throwing thousands of gold at his faction, every time which is kind of neat. So they're actually moving up the power scale quite quickly. If you actually look on that chart and look at the Crescent Blades, they've gone from a 2 to a 4.5 in a matter of weeks. Which nobody else is. You can see the pluses I've added, the most recent pluses on them.
Yeah.
To kind of show the alteration that they've done. So it's kind of interesting how the players choose to do each of their own things. And as Joe will tell you with Aurelius, he's a wizard, so a lot of his money has to go to copying spells and scrolls and buying scrolls. So it's really tough that the monetary management, which is fun, it makes it fun. So in order to keep moving forward in things you need to know in Khassan as we get closer to this first adventure, one of the things Russ mentioned, because one of the first places you guys went, you wanted to meet with Filigir at the Stout Brewery. But what happened first was the introduction to Indrizzle's. So Indrizzle's Iniquities is the magic shop I kind of came up, and I'm not actually sure how I came up with this idea.
I'm really curious about this because this is brilliant. But Dungeon Masters listening, this is a brilliant idea. And I love how you did this. So go ahead.
So I knew the players had either some people pronounce it chitin, some people pronounce it chitin, but they had this leftover carapace armor from their battles with the Myriad. And one of the things I didn't mention down there, just to kind of keep things moving, the Myriad has caretakers. I'm not the Myriad. The Bell, this artifact has caretakers, and they happen to be these mouse folk, these sorcerers that help take care of it. And when they got the chitinous or chitin armor or plates, they wanted to know where they could turn it into something useful. And so those guys had recommended a family member or distant cousin of theirs, Indrizzle, who happens to work out of Khassan, and he owns this Arcane Iniquities. And so originally I just kind of made this place up for them to come up with. I started playing around with it. I'm like, well, what if I come up with a system that they can buy magic items, but in order to buy magic items, they're really buying for research of where these magic items are and how to get to them. And so I kind of came up with a system within Drizzle. He's a diviner and his brother is a conjurer. And so between the two of them, his brother isn't local, but they work together still. He has a shop in Shensum, which is another, to the northeast is another kingdom. But they both kind of have these shops going. And so with your down payment of 300 gold, Drizzle will attempt to find a magic item you're looking for. And of course, the players all start, looking for books, or some of them Google stuff to see what's the most powerful, which not like Russ and I don't play like that either. But, some of them are interested in it. So I'm like, whatever, this will be fun. So what I did is when they come up with these items, first of all, it's like a D12 number of days, depending on the rating of it. So for a very rare item, it takes him up to 12 days to find it. So it takes time. It's not instantly that he can find it. And also what happens is if he can't find it within 30 days, he gives you the chance for your money back. So that may come into play too. But so as these players started, trying to find the items, so I have this ledger, which is not for the players, so I won't share that for you. But there's a ledger of all the different things that the players are looking for. And so Nam Foodle immediately dove in with his 300 gold and wanted to see if there was a way to. We failed to mention that Snow Fury died in a kind of
neglect, which was really sad. It was really
in a very sad way, because when they first got to, I don't know why I even did this, but when they first got to the camel, they decided to pig out, especially Zalar and Nam and Snow Fury, because there was endless amounts of food and they were just eating. And they said, just keep eating. So I rolled to see if Snow Fury ate himself into a coma, which he did. And then I'm like, and Nam passed out afterwards. So I'm like, let's see if anybody notices that Snow Fury is starting not to be able to breathe. And so I made all these rolls and nobody noticed poor Snow. So Nam woke up with Snow Fury gone. Now, I don't know why I chose to go down that road. I think I was thinking as a DM, well, now he's got the snake. So does he really care? He always forgets about this little chipmunk. Does he really care about him? So I'm like, I'll just make this thing happen. It'll just be kind of a funny story. And there's also this monkey that they rent that is kind of like
a monkey. The monkey is officially our prune tester. You got to have it.
Yeah, well, he's a good tester for food. His name's Chim Chim. He's good for testing food, and he's also kind of like a self-help guy that can kind of make you bring you down if you're feeling bad or whatever. So he comes out there and you pay for him, but they're paying for everything at that point. So anyway, I thought, well, maybe he'll make friends with the monkey. Who knows what'll happen? But Russ was more attached to Snow Fury than I imagined. So he wanted to turn Snow Fury into. He has a billowing cloak, so it's just.
Yeah, you missed that part. Magic. So Nam, one of Nam's things is this is about the time too that when I created Nam, they came out with the cantrip magic items, which are basically useless magic items, so Nam started out at level 1 with a cloak of billowing, which all it does is just flap about. And so whenever Nam Floodle does any kind of pontificating or orations, I always go flap to represent the cloak flacking. And then, but then you killed Snow Fury. Well, you didn't kill him, but Snow Fury dies due to neglect. And so now I'm really sad. And so my request for Drizzle, again, not the most powerful. I didn't even know what the magic item would do. I was just like, is it possible to put the soul of Snow Fury into a cloak that I could wear so that his spirit could always be with me? And then I figured it'd maybe be a cloak of billowing or something with him in it. And then, John, you can tell me what you actually decided to do, because it became pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, so I was thinking, well, this cloak's got to kind of have a personality. So I started thinking of Doctor Strange's cloak from the Marvel movies. And I'm like, well, we got to do something like that. His name has snow in it. So let's make this all about snow. And one of the funny things that Russ doesn't really know, nor Nam, is that this Snow Fury, and when I originally came up with Snow Fury, I'm not sure this was where I was going with it, but what I decided to go with it later, he's actually from the Fae. So he ended up in the Jade Wood by accident. And so it kind of was cool that they attached and became friends. And so he's a little more than just your average chipmunk. So it's kind of cool that he's putting him into a cloak. And I'm like, he's got a little bit more personality and a little bit more intelligence than the average, chipmunk. So not so much of intelligence that he didn't eat himself to death.
It's still starting at a chipmunk, so his baseline.
Yeah, so we could have doubled his intelligence and not much didn't happen. So, but anyway, So I started coming up when they started asking these things, I started coming up with stuff. And when you jump into this campaign, you're literally on the first real quest they went on. So what happens is Indrizzle identifies where they are for 300 gold. Now for 50% of the cost, he will tell you exactly where it is and in the world and how you can
the item, right?
And how you can find it. In this case, he needed a special item to craft the cloak. So he needed this thing called an ice spirit that he figured out to craft this cloak. So he was trying to research and figure out where he could find the ice spirit. So that's how that all happened. So then what he does is once he tells you where this, it's all about sales for Indrizzle. So then what he does is once he offers you at 75 gold a pop, he can actually give, it's per person, he can give you a scroll that will teleport you there. For another 75 gold, you can teleport back using the same scrolls to his teleportation circle, which he has in a little force cage in his shop, because if some people might teleport back during off hours and he doesn't want you roaming around his shop. He also has 2 clockwork tigers in there, Sheba and Shera, that guard his shop as well. But anyway, the players are all like, for example, Namfoodle wanted this ice spirit for his cloak. And that's the only one we've actually delved into. So, and everybody listening will be right into that. Aurelius was looking for a sunblade. He has been informed, although Nam wasn't around when this happened, but he's been informed they found something much more valuable called the Blade of Storms. They could not find a sunblade. So that's, and they're starting to narrow down where that is. Cal actually was looking for some bracers, but they discovered some nearby bracers, but they were attuned to somebody. So they usually if these items are already belonging to somebody, they're like, do you really want to go after them? Because if you do, it's all right with us. This is how we disassociate with what happens. It's your decision to go. So anyway, Cal ended up finding them on somebody they inevitably did battle with. So that worked out. Cal is now looking for a Staff of Striking. Drell is looking for a Blood Fury tattoo, which is insane. So we're actually working on a lesser Blood Fury tattoo. But these things also, cost-wise, it's based on how rare they are. So an example, the Snow Fury thing ended up costing like almost 7,000 gold, I think it was at the end. The Aurelius's Blade of Storms, he's been informed 50% of the cost is 14,000 gold pieces to know the location. Wow. So we're talking about real money now.
That's a big investment.
Also Aurelius was also...
What's interesting about this, John, and I think it's brilliant about this is your players now have a way to get crazy magic items. So if someone always wanted a certain thing, they can go get it, it'll cost. We're also, and it's not what's cool about combining this with the faction sentiment stuff is, our ultimate goal is to overthrow the city. We know you've made it very clear that getting faction influence is certainly going to help there. It's kind of setting us up for this big climactic something that's going to happen. I assume giant rebellion or something.
Oh, one of the things I expressed, I mentioned this to Devin when we were driving my son who plays a new character, which we haven't even got to yet, but hopefully we'll get to soon. I mentioned to him, I said, one of the things about the factions is not necessarily whether you overthrow the Sultan or not. It may play whether or not, depending on how good you guys are playing, but it's also what does Khassan look like after you overthrow?
Right. Who's going to take power? Right.
Does it look like a war zone, or does it look like you can just slide a new leader in and everything is cool? And that really depends on the factions and what happens afterwards. So that's a huge part in kind of what it looks like after this, assuming you guys are successful, which may or may not happen. We don't even know.
So we're faced with this challenge, right? Where it's like, well, we can have all kinds of crazy cool magic items, but it's going to be stupid expensive. But then also, and it's a side quest generator, which is also brilliant. So, and I think you mentioned this, but in Drizzle, what he does is he tells you where it is and he offers to teleport you there and teleport you back. So what's cool about that, and you talked about this in the last episode, I think, which is it allows you as the dungeon master to create different cool places, because we're in Khassan, we're in a desert, pretty much every game's in the same climate, same temperate zone and everything. But now it's like, oh no, Namfoodle, to go get your super cool cloak with Snow Fury, and you're gonna have to go to this lair of a white dragon up in the frozen north here, but I'll teleport you there. So now we got a whole adventure, whole side quest in the cold.
And then the other thing that happens, which I don't think we caught on tape because it happened before we started taping, was that Indrizzle upsells the customer before they leave.
Right.
So for example, with the White Dragon adventure, to get the Ice Spirit, he's trying to sell everybody, cold resistance potions and healing potions.
Yep.
So he
Joe's addicted to. He's got Joe's character buying him out every time he walks in the store. It's awesome.
Right. And so I have a replenish system. Yeah. So Joe pretty much buys out every healing potion that this guy can replenish, which is cool for healing, but it's a lot. And again, it's a lot of money because you're talking. Yeah. It's only 50 gold for a base one, which doesn't do that much. But you start getting up to the greater ones, you're starting to spend 500 gold a pop.
Right.
Yeah. So you're really starting to add the money up. And so, example, like 50% of the staff of striking, which is a really insane +3 weapon. It's going to cost Cal 15,000 gold just to know the location.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we're talking about real money now.
And then another cool side quest. Who knows where that's going to be? It's going to be awesome.
Right. And so all this stuff is fun because, especially with Roll20, because you get to just pull up random maps of places and go. And at the same time, we talk about world making when we started. It's actually making. I'm focusing on different parts of the world, and I'm like creating these little places. Now maybe the monster gets wiped out when you go there or whatever. But it makes me delve into certain things going on in the world, which is kind of neat.
We got to wrap soon, but we left out 2 whole characters, so let's go ahead and introduce.
Yeah. So let's jump in that. So basically, to speed things up, the players are going after the different organizations that we mentioned earlier. They're currently involved in trying to take down Maelstrom. They did a raid on one of their boats. Their large ships bringing in goods. They did raids on their warehouses. So when they went to go raid on the boat, basically, Zalara has been pulled from the group by an organization known as the Crescent Blade, and they're the true followers of Sahanin, which we barely mentioned Sahanin, but she's the major god in play or major goddess in play right now. She's the goddess of the moon, and so in helping the Chosen, which we didn't really mention their iteration. So the Chosen were the Chosen of the Sultan, then became the Chosen of Zalara. And now they're the Chosen of Sahanin. So Zalara chose them to help her overthrow the Sultan. And now in the next phase of things, as we go through these other factions that are involved, they are now the Chosen of Sahanin herself. So that's where they were still referring to them as the Chosen. And to aid their Chosen in their endeavors was our 2 other characters that have been added and are now in play now. And that is Devin, my son's character. This is Azrael. And so Azrael El Azad is an actual Azamar. He also has angel blood in him. He is, quote unquote, a brother to Zalara. So he's actually taking Zalara's place to help while Zalara works amongst the unfortunates and other people kind of showing her face. And they're trying to, use her presence to get the rest of the Khassan on board with what's to come, hopefully. And so Azrael has the blood of the sword of Sahanin. So he's like a actual, descendant, has the blood of a warrior angel, whereas Zalara had the blood of a messenger angel. So he's kind of stepping in to do what must be done. And he is an Azamar cleric of the light. So he wields mostly moonfire. That's why these flames but he wields fire, but it's all represented in fluff wise as moonfire because he is a servant of the goddess of the moon. And so we don't know too much about him. So you're not too far behind learning about him because he's only recently been introduced. So you can kind of learn as we go. And then the other new character is Oma Agraz Drell, who we just happily refer to as Drell. So Drell is from the same organization as Azrael. They have known each other. They're both from the Crescent Blade, which is kind of the underground organization trying to bring things back under where they're the true worshipers of Sahanin, I guess is the best way to say it. And so he is an actual zealot barbarian. So he gets his divine rage and divine powers from Sahanin as well. And so he is a Genasi zealot barbarian. So just real quick on the Genasi, the Sultan, his family, several generations ago, they ended up somehow controlling these jinn. And so they have a ton of these jinn or genies bound to them and so the jinn in their wisdom, trying to break this bond, started to sow the seed of their descendants. So basically spreading their bloodstream to citizens of Khassan to try to have them one day, because they're immortal. So they started this a long time ago to try to bring these children they're called the descendants of the jinn. And their idea is to one day overthrow the Sultan, because then original ancestors, these jinn will be free. And so that's where the Genasi come into play. They're actually children of the jinn. So that's where Drell is. So sometimes you'll hear him refer to other things he's involved in, and he's working with the descendants of the jinn to, they're a very poor, like unorganized group that he's kind of trying to work with one of the other factions that he could make into a powerhouse, but that's up to what he, the decisions that Craig is playing him and my son Devin. So Craig, you guys all know from the wet, that is the other original D6 Godfather. So you all know Craig, but he plays, and you'll recognize his voice immediately as he plays Drell. But those are all of our characters. So I know we ran a little long. We have been playing for quite a while. And just to catch everybody up, so the party is 8th level, verging on 9th level. So we're doing I guess it's mid-level, but it's some cool stuff. These guys joined. Yeah, these guys joined in at 7th level. Aurelius and not Aurelius, Azrael and Drell. They joined in right before they started really hammering it to Maelstrom. So far, what hasn't been caught on tape is they have wiped out one of the Maelstroms, or taken out one of the Maelstrom's biggest ships that carried their goods, and they have taken out 3 of their warehouses. And the Maelstrom has basically fallen back to this stronghold at this time where their leadership is. And that's kind of known by everybody in the party. And that's kind of the last thing they have to do so you think of these columns holding up the Sultan, as that's kind of how I like to refer to him. And to take down the Sultan, you have to take down these 3 columns. And so this is what everybody thinks is the final blow to the Maelstrom that will drop them. And so that's, catching you up to where we are. Because most of the sessions we have that have started this campaign, that where you guys will be jumping in, is on the side quest for the ice spirit that is to help make Namfoodle's cloak. So.
Exactly. It's all about the cloak, baby. Well, awesome. Well, John, thank you so much for that amazing summary. It was so much fun for me just to kind of relive it all. I hope our listeners feel caught up here. So what we're going to do is, and thank you also, John, and to the whole party, really, all the players, for agreeing to allow us to record this and share it with all of you, our listeners. So what's going to happen is D6 Generation will going back to weekly content. So as you know, we usually publish every other Sunday, but when we have a D&D campaign to share, then we go to weekly. And what will happen is we'll have one episode will be just random gamer content, whatever the topic of the episode is. And then the next week will be another episode of now the Sands of Khassan. And so after you hear this episode, just expect every other week it'll be a Sands of Khassan episode, and the off weeks it'll be random gamer content. Well, John, thanks again for joining me and giving all this great background and taking the time to really think through how to summarize your campaign. I think it was a lot of fun, and I can't wait for the session another day here.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at info@the d6generation.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming.